Adoption and expensive. Two words that do not always belong together. There are 120,000 children in the United States that are waiting for a forever family, and adopting through this option is extremely affordable. I'm Marcy Bursack, an adoptive mom of a sibling pair, and also the author of The Forgotten Adoption Option. Twice monthly, I will interview people like adoptive parents and adopted children who have been touched by foster care adoption. My goal is to find more forever families and increase awareness about foster care adoption, because if it were you or me, we would want someone to do this for us. Welcome to the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast. I am so excited to introduce you to Pam. Pam is a fellow adoptive mom that expanded her family through foster care adoption. After having 5 biological children, Pam and her husband stepped up and volunteered to adopt a sibling group of 7 children ranging from ages 13 to age 2. Hi, Pam.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
It is such a joy. I can't wait to dive into your story because multiple friends on multiple social media platforms shared news articles about what you and your husband had done. And I think it's because they spotted a modern life example of adults stepping up to do exactly what I did and exactly what I'm trying to invite others to do, which is to become the forever family for waiting children, especially sibling groups in foster care. And so I'm so excited because you all adopted 7 kids and you already had 5 kids, and my kids were excited to do the math when we were talking about it before the recording. I'm like, Mom, that's like a lot of kids. And I'm like, isn't that awesome? It's so cool.
Yes, it is pretty cool. We love our large family.
Which is so amazing. So I'm just going to dive on in and we'll talk more about size. So many families who I'm coming to learn that maybe, I don't know if it's 50%, but it's a pretty high percentage of families that choose to pursue adopting children through foster care already have biological children. So they're adding to their family through adoption. And I'm curious, how did you talk to your 5 biological children that not only were you planning to adopt, but you were planning to adopt a sibling group of 7? How do they react to that?
Well, I think in our situation, our 5 children were mostly grown by the time we were coming into this thought or decision of adoption. And to back up a little bit, we had actually started fostering when we had like 2 teenagers in the home, and our third oldest was in college. And so she came home for the summers, and it was so fun to play with the foster kids and have these siblings that came and went in our home over a 5-year period of time. During that period of time, my 2 youngest that were teenagers when we started, they were growing, and my 4th was getting ready to get married, and my 5th was getting ready to graduate from high school. That was about the period of time where my husband and I were at a crossroads and sort of deciding what our lives were going to hold next. We were about to be empty nesters technically, but we had been fostering for 5.5 years at that point. And we really loved working in that, arena of foster care. We loved caring for these children, even though it was sometimes heartbreaking, obviously, to say goodbye to them. We just really felt a call to be a part of that world. And so our children, I think, absorbed that call during the time that we were fostering, and they really grew this heart for these children that were in need of love, for however long. And so I don't think it was a huge stretch for them when we told them that we wanted to adopt. I think that, all of those years of having children in our home and, treating them as our own and bringing them along on vacations or whatever our life held over those 5 years, my older kids, my adult kids, they were used to it, and they were used to welcoming little faces into the home whenever it needed to happen. So I say that, I give that background to say for my kids, it wasn't this totally foreign concept of, what do you mean you're bringing in new children? It was really not not much of a stretch. And then to say that we were adopting, they were like, okay, and adopting 7, that was probably the stretch part of it. They were probably like, okay, are you sure about that? And some of them did really say, like, are you sure? And I think it was my oldest 2 boys, they're very pragmatic, and they were at that time about 30, 29-ish, and 27-ish. So they were kind of like, are you sure? Like, that's, you guys gonna be like fit and have enough energy to do this? And they were more concerned, I think, with their mom and dad. We're like old, right? Because we raised them already, so we must be old, right? So I think they were a little more concerned with that piece of it, but they never said, oh, that's weird for you to bring, new children into our family. It wasn't ever that piece of it that was any concern at all. It was like, you sure you guys can handle this? Yeah, we can handle it. Okay, then, I support you. And my girls, so I have two boys first and then 2 girls. My girls are very they and of course they saw the story immediately, were like, oh yes, we have to take them, yes we must. We must make them part of our family. They sort of have that same heart that I was describing for children who've been through trauma and children who are in need of a home, and so they just immediately wanted to embrace them as well. And so, and then my youngest was still in the home, but getting ready to graduate from high school. And I think for him, his childhood really sort of changed when, we started fostering. He went from being the baby of the family to having younger ones to take care of. And it created this great responsibility in him to learn and to be a protector, and to instead of being the baby, he went into being the one that was in charge of being the older brother and being the protector. And I think he really fulfilled that role so well, and it was natural to him, I think, to say that he would continue to fulfill that role. So that's how it went when we talked to them about it. And it perhaps is different for us because our kids were a little older than some folks who are choosing to adopt, but for us, our older kids just embraced the idea pretty easily. So it was really nice.
That's amazing. And a couple of things that stuck out to me, Pam, is you said, my husband and I loved taking care of other kids, or you said, your fostering experience, you loved that. What did you love about it?
For me, my previous career, I was a registered nurse. I worked in labor and delivery. I think in nursing, you just have a lot of people who go into nursing, they have that nurturing spirit already. And not only that, but just being a mom, I always loved being a mom. I couldn't imagine not having little ones to take care of. It was so hard for me to imagine. My husband and I were married very young. We were parents very young. So we felt like it's what we had been doing our whole lives, really. And we felt like, it was something that we did well together, that we made a great parenting team. And I think that it just fulfilled this nurturing need in us, but also this gave this great sense of just satisfaction of being able to help, in many times going through the foster system and helping with reunification, you're sort of taking care of the trauma of these little ones while their parents are taking care of their own trauma and their own issues. And then you work towards, most of the time, reunification. And so it's like a rehabilitation almost at that point, where you're taking these kids and you're saying, I'll work with you, and mom or dad or both will work on themselves, and we'll see if you can, get back together again in the end. But that work of just, I felt like it was a ministry, really, to just nurture and minister to these children at whatever place they were in their lives while they were awaiting, sort of the rest of their fate to be decided, what was going to happen there. It just felt, for lack of a better term, I guess, it felt like I was doing something that was really worthwhile, and just felt like there was purpose to my life when I was helping others in need.
It's amazing. And I love what you just shared about your nursing career, because I'm thinking about any time I've engaged with healthcare, maybe I was the one in need. You go because you're needing something, right? You're going to be cared for, but you're not going to permanently stay. You're hoping to go back home. And so I love that parallel that you could had already kind of seen in your own life, that you're like, I know how to temporarily meet
Mm-hmm.
someone's needs and then wish them well. And that's such a gift to have that insight.
Yeah.
And I had one other question about something you shared that I think is interesting. Your youngest biological son, you said he was still at home, and he kind of, it was kind of a positive thing for him to take on
Mm-hmm.
kind of the older sibling role. And I wonder if you just want to speak to people who may have kids maybe in high school right now, that they're like, I wonder how that would work for me. It sounded like maybe you all had pre-existing good trust and strong communication with your son, but I'm curious if you have any tips for other parents that are thinking, well, I might want to do that. How do I talk to my high schooler or high schoolers about that?
Yeah, our youngest of our biological children, Sam, whose name's Sam, and he just, I don't know, he's a very kind-hearted kid. And when you go to your child who maybe has had, just they've never wanted for things necessarily, right? And you go to them and you say, hey, there's these kids out there that don't have what you have, or there's some kids who, they're in the foster system, and you sort of explain that to them. And I think so many children automatically have that feeling of care for their fellow man, or care and nurturing, or what can I do to help, or can we help those kids? And I think it really was just building off of that natural inclination that we have as human beings to help another person. So I was really, when we first went into fostering, I wasn't necessarily thinking, oh, this will be such an experience for my children, my teenagers. It was more that, my husband and I were sort of like, hey, we've got all this love to give, and our teenagers are busy on their own. They're hardly ever home, and they just are, they're growing up, and we have all this love to give, and let's use some of this time that we have and care for these kids. And of course our teenagers will be part of it, but it wasn't necessarily in our minds like, hey, we're doing this with our teenagers, experience at the forefront, because we sort of felt like they were busy with their things in their lives. We were really actually pleasantly surprised with the way they wanted to be so involved, and they were just drawn to these children, and drawn to, the nurturing of these wounded little souls. And at times, they would come, be dropped off on the doorstep, and maybe have one outfit with them, or, if you've been through foster
Yeah.
care, you sort of heard some of the stories. And just to see that need and that reaching out from your biological children to these, essentially a stranger who just came to your doorstep, and just this acceptance of come into our home, and come and feel the love that we have here for you, and let us help you and make you feel safe. I mean, it's such a beautiful experience to watch that in your children that are already in your home, to watch them reach out and embrace someone else, and bring them in. And my oldest daughter actually worded it very very sweetly. She said this not too long ago, and someone asked her, how did you feel when your parents said that they wanted to adopt? And my oldest daughter, she's 27 now, she said, well, I had a great childhood, and I thought my parents were awesome. So I thought it was going to be really cool that someone else could experience that as well.
Aw,
I thought that was so sweet,
what a
because
compliment.
isn't that, it just really was so sweet to hear her perspective and think like, you know, not in the way that I'm going to say it. I'm joking, but kind of like, I'm done with them now. You can have them. Like, they did a great job on me. You can have them now. So I thought that was really sweet that it was like a almost like a sharing, of that
Mm.
experience. Like I had this experience growing up and I had this childhood that, did me well. And so I want others to have that. And I thought that was really a neat perspective coming from one of my older children.
Yeah, like to share. I want you to share in the love of my family and to feel like that. And I think
Hmm.
some people can relate. I know for me, like I could bring home friends while I was in college and they could come for the holiday dinners or whatever. And my dad was always amazing at kind of, they were an extension of the family. So it sounds like your daughter may have had a similar
Yeah.
flavor of like, I loved having people around my family and I love being part of my family. So why not just make that bigger so that more people
Right.
can have that love? That's so
Yeah.
touching. Okay, so I know lots of people are curious because your family is a larger size, right? So
Hmm.
what kind of accommodations did you have to make going from, it sounded like one at home and now you're having seven new, and so did you have to modify things? Did you move to a bigger home? Did you have to get a bigger vehicle? What all did you have to modify?
We lived in a six-bedroom home already, which was part of the reason why my husband and I were sort of debating at that time as our youngest bio son was, getting to the age where he was going to move out. My husband and I were like, it can't just be us, rattling around in this six-bedroom house. Like, are we, and we did have one foster child at the time we had a baby, but he was already moving into a permanency situation with a family member that they had found. So we knew that he wasn't going to be with us for very much longer. So really, it was my husband and I and this little baby and our high school senior son who was played football and worked a job and was at school, so he was never home, really had a girlfriend, right? So never home. So it was already feeling so lonely in this six-bedroom house with just my husband and I and this one baby. It was so weird. We just kept saying we've never had just one child to take care of since we were like really, really young. It was because we were like 18 when we got married. It's so strange. So we had a big house, and so that part of it was easy. We just bought some bunk beds and sort of redecorated a little bit, a couple of coats of paint, and the house part was easy. I think there were some organizational things that I definitely put into place. Having seven come in at once was really a lot logistically to try to just get settled and organized and everything. It's like um, it was almost like giving birth to septuplets, saying like
Yes.
you come, they all come at once. You don't get one at a time where you can sort of like, oh, and now the new baby is coming, and now the new baby is coming. You add onto it, right? They just all came at once with all of their things. They came from being in foster care for a year, so they had a lot of things with them, and it was a sorting and oh, okay, what do we do with this, and where do we put that, and how do we do, organize everyone's laundry. So it definitely had some challenges, and we did have to buy a bigger vehicle. So we bought a 15 passenger van. We figured go big or go home, right? So
Yep. Yep.
so we bought the huge Ford Transit, like tour bus thing, and we just love it. We love it so much. We bought the extra long, extra tall so that we can stand up and hook in all the car seats and we can
Yes.
walk back and forth up and down the aisles and everything. So we really love our big van because now that we bought that extra room, we can take friends along with us, or if my one of my older kids is there and my grandkids, because we have grandkids too, they can all pile in and we can go to the beach together or something like that. So the combination of the bigger vehicle was really the main thing, and just organization of the house that we already had, thank goodness. And that was one of the things that really drew me into the kids' story when I first saw it. The first thing that came to my mind was like, nobody's going to have room for seven. Nobody's ever licensed first and has seven open beds. I'm thinking
Right.
with this mind of a foster parent, they have a hard time looking for two beds or three beds sometimes. So the first thought I had was nobody's going to have room for them. And then my second thought was, but I have room for them. So that was really just one of the blessings of the timing of the whole situation, and why I knew that it was one of the reasons why I knew that it was the right thing for us to do because things had been opened up so perfectly for them to fit into our home and into our family.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about how it felt like you were having septuplets. Because I remember when my two kids moved in, and I'm like, at the time they were in preschool, but everything that was paperwork, and I know you know what I'm talking about, and I didn't even
Oh
have seven, I
gosh.
had two. Every set of paperwork was doubled. And I'm like, did I have twins?
Mhm.
Like, this is so overwhelming. Like,
Yes, I had the most foster placements at a time I had was 3. And so I had only ever had to do 3 sets of paperwork at once. And so having to do 7 was a bit overwhelming for sure. But yeah, I was really glad when the adoption was final and the paperwork was done, the monthly, weekly paperwork and all of that for sure.
wow. Okay, so I'm wondering because you had mentioned earlier that you all had fostered and your husband had been fostering. Was your foster license active when you saw the story about your kids?
It was, yeah, because we had actually a foster child in our home at the time. We had a baby still. And we had, I think we were licensed for 3, or we were licensed for 4, but the most we had ever taken was 3. So yeah, it was definitely still active. I mean, we had placements pretty continuously over that 5.5 years before we saw the story of these kiddos. We maybe took a couple of months break here and there, but you always feel that, there's so much need out there. You almost feel guilty when you have open beds and you're not taking anyone.
Right. Right. Because you're like, I could help. I could, yeah.
Right.
That's such a
Yeah.
hard spot. I've been
Yeah.
there too. And talking to my husband, it was
Yeah.
really hard to say we have to say no to this thing because we're saying yes to this.
Hmm.
And those are
Right.
hard decisions. So I'm wondering, because of your unique situation and what you and your husband done, if you met someone who wanted maybe like, because I know that oftentimes this is such a private decision. Like anything about expanding your family size is often pretty private, whether you're having a biological child or you're adopting. And so you may never meet the people or person you're talking to right now, but people usually are privately kind of debating these things in their heart. So if someone's already thinking, okay, I want to do a sibling group, but they're having some maybe uncertainties, some reservations that are holding them back, being on this side of adopting your 7 kiddos, what advice or encouragement would you give for someone or a couple that's like, kind of want to do this, but we have so many questions or so many like what ifs, and it's kind of holding us back?
I think I would really say ultimately there's so many rewards and so many blessings that come from just taking that leap of faith, because it really is a leap of faith in the beginning. As
Yeah.
much experience as you have in fostering, or as little experience as you have with working with children who've, been through trauma, you just can never be 100% prepared for what that individual child or children are going to present with. And so it really is this leap of faith. I mean, we did foster for those several years before, and we had experience with different behaviors, but we never fostered anyone older than 5 years old. And so we were always fostering little ones. So, I mean, we had 2, a preteen and a teen that came in, and that was a brand new experience for us, a total leap of faith, because, teenagers are not necessarily easy, even when they don't come from any background of trauma or go through the things that, my kids ended up having to go through before I met them. So it really is just this leap of faith that you take, and you read as much as you can, and you study up on childhood trauma, and you just try to be really insightful. But in the end, once you go through the period of settling and the period of adjusting everyone and the period of just melding together as a family, I call it, it's really, there's just so many blessings from it. I see blessings every single day now that we're 2 years in, and 2 years from the time they had moved in is where we are right now, just almost exactly. And I just look
Wow.
back, and it's like I almost talk about it like if you've had a biological child and you remember your postpartum period, how it could be so, you're sleep deprived and you're just like can barely sometimes open your eyes or can barely function, and you're tired and maybe you have spit up all over you and maybe your clothes, you only had a shower for a while or whatever, and you think, as you're going through it, you're like, wow, this is really hard. But at the same time, there's so much joy in what you're doing, and there's so much love that you're putting forth, and so much effort, and it's like service, godly service, really, to that child that you gave birth to. And I feel like it's the same when you're adopting, is that you're putting forth so much effort, and it's sometimes that hard that you're putting in that later gives you those joyful fruits, those blessings that you can enjoy, and the wonderful return of love and the safety and security that has developed over those, that time that you put into it, then comes back in return just tenfold, if not more. I mean, I constantly look at the kids in amazement of how far they've come in this period of time of being, so scared and so, grieving the loss of their parents, and going through the trauma that they went through. And I look at them now and they're just carefree, and their biggest concern is, what we're going to play on the playground today. And that's what I want for them. That's what I've dreamed of for them, and is not to worry about where my food's going to come from, or not to worry about, whether I'm going to have a warm place to sleep. I want them to worry about who's going to play Foursquare on the playground. Right? So, I mean, that's to me the blessing of just taking that leap of faith. And I think anything in life that comes with great reward also comes with, hard work and sometimes just a leap of faith.
Mm. Absolutely. Well said. That's so beautiful. I love that you're wanting and you're seeing your kids really shift I would reframe, because even from my own experience, like as the stability, as the child experiences stability in a loving home, there's this child that comes out that gets to be the one that's like, who's
Right.
playing Foursquare with me? I don't have to worry about these other things that have caused me
Right.
stress, but maybe as a kid I didn't have words to say it was stress. But now I can just let
Mm-hmm.
it go, and I'm going through the healing process, and I'm growing, and that's just so amazing.
For sure.
Amazing. Okay, so one of the things I thought was really interesting as I was doing some pre-research on your family is in People magazine, it said that there were thousands of people who had called wanting to adopt your children when they were trying to recruit a forever family for them. Do you have any idea? Have you been told any of the details of why your family was chosen?
I don't know a lot of the details of that vetting process that they went through. They just told me when I called that they had had thousands of calls. And when I first heard that, I thought, okay, well, good. I'm glad that the kids will be taken care of then. It was like my very first phone call, and not in a million years was I saying, well, out of that thousand, it should be me. I just was so glad to hear that these kids whose story had touched me so deeply were going to be taken care of. But, I gave my information and I got off the phone, and I just couldn't stop thinking about them. And I thought the next day, is it too soon to call back? Is it too soon to call again and check and see out of the thousand if and so I think that I didn't get a lot of detail. I do know they started a matching with someone, but then it fell out, and I don't know why. I didn't get a lot of the details, but I can only imagine that so many people were touched by the story, but then didn't necessarily have the space or the ability to care for all of them. It would have to have moved and would have to, have made major adjustments, and possibly because of the fact that initially we were already licensed.
Right.
We already had all of this room. We had the experience of fostering sibling groups previously. I mean, possibly it was that, but I think that as the social workers had more and more conversations with us, there were all of these little coincidences that we kept coming across that made our story just sort of weave together so perfectly. I'll just give you an example in that, when the social workers are looking for different things about, they're just looking to get to know you when they're wanting to match, a sibling set with you. And so they said, hey, these kids have come from Las Vegas. They used to live in Las Vegas. And how would you feel if they had a family member in Las Vegas that they still wanted to keep contact with? And my opinion about that was really an open opinion. And I said, that's absolutely important to me, that they keep contact with anyone that they want to keep contact with. I feel like it's so important that they're in touch with where they came from, if that's what they want, and that they're so in touch with people that, they want to remain in touch with. And I said, coincidentally, my oldest daughter lives in Las Vegas, and we go there rather frequently.
Oh,
So
wow.
it wouldn't be any problem for us to take them to Las Vegas, all the time, essentially. And the social worker was like, really? Oh my goodness, that's just amazing. And I said, yeah, we're always in Las Vegas. It's 4 hours away. We hop in the car, we drive up there. And I said, if they've got people there that they want to see, then gosh darn, they're going to see him, because we're going to be there and they're going to see
Wow.
him. So that's not a problem. And things like that happened over and over again. They would ask me a question. I would say, well, actually, and it would just be something that was fitting so perfectly in with what these kids needed or wanted. And so I think it was just kind of like coincidence after coincidence after coincidence, which I call it divine intervention, but
Yes.
you can call it what you will. There were so many things that just helped us fit together so perfectly. Their needs were met by things that we had available or things that we already were doing in our family. And it was just a perfect match, really.
I love that you call that weaving. Like it just,
Yeah,
yeah, the divine intervention of just seeing the handiwork of that is amazing. They're just
right,
like, well, this isn't
right.
inconvenient at all. In fact, we already have this is going on. Like it's already a regular thing. They can just come with us.
Exactly.
That's so
Yeah.
great. So Pam, I have one final question, and I know off air you and I were talking a little bit about seeds and seeds being planted in our lives that we didn't hear about a child in need or about foster care adoption and like that night go adopt the dog. Like we didn't like do that
Mm-hmm.
because like that's not how this works. And I've been
Right.
toying with, okay, what were those seeds in our lives? And one of the things that I've been asking myself is like, for you and me, what would have happened if in high school, when we learned all like the reproductive health stuff, what if they would have included family expansion options? And one of those options would have been, by the way, you can adopt kids who are waiting in foster care because their parental rights have been severed for whatever reason. It makes me wonder, like, what if we planted in the minds of teenagers that, as you adults and get older and you want to have children, there's this way to expand your family
Mm-hmm.
size. Like, I wonder for you, like, thoughts on that, but also like, do you see seeds in your own life that helped you make this decision?
I know that one of my seeds was working as a labor and delivery nurse for 14 years. I worked with the mothers who, at some point, had to have social work involvement. I worked with the babies who were being turned over to Child Protective Services in the hospital, and those situations always just made my heart ache and always just made me feel like I wanted to help those situations. I didn't know a lot about it. I didn't know a lot about the foster system at that time, but I absolutely knew that it was something I wanted to be part of and to help with in whatever way that I could. And I used to come home from work and tell my husband, oh, this baby was, they took the baby to foster care, and like, I want to help and I want to be part of this. And I had young children at the time. I was working full time. My husband was working full time. And my husband would always say, someday we can do that. And I remember as my kids got older, I remember thinking, is it someday yet? Is it time
Aw.
yet? And that's really when those seeds really started to blossom. Was there there was a time in my life where I felt that we were ready. And I think that happens for a lot of people where it's sort of in the back of their minds, or it's an idea or it's a thought. And when the time is right, that seed can start to grow and can start to flourish. And for us, it was really just a matter of timing, and having the the time and the opportunity and the space to be able to do that, both emotionally and physically, the space to do that. And I think that, to answer your question, if I would have heard about it in high school, or just as an option when I was younger, I really think that it would have been something that was definitely in my mind for a longer period of time. And I say that because my children who have lived in the foster system and know what it is and know what it means will say to me that they want to foster when they get older, or they want to adopt children when they get older. And it's because they're familiar with that world, and they're familiar with that option. And the same thing with my biological children. They say, I definitely would be something that I wouldn't rule out, as my life progresses. It's there in my mind as a possibility, as an option. They're all young and newly married, so they're not quite, necessarily to the point where they would be doing that quite yet, but it's something that's in their mind. So I think that being introduced to it, at the period that I was in my life was fine, and that seed was planted, and it just sort of stayed there and for a while until it was time for it to grow. But I think what a great difference we could make if we did educate people at a younger age, because so many people now come to me and say, how do I do this? I didn't know this existed. I didn't realize that there were children out there just waiting for homes. I didn't know that. So many people talk to me on my Instagram page and say, how do I get started? What do I do? And I love that, being able to help and let people know that, gosh, there's a whole, heart gallery out there with pictures of children just waiting and needing homes. So.
Right. Because you're right. There's like a lack of knowing. And then once you do know, you're like, well, then how do I do this? And that's why I wrote the Forgotten Adoption Option, is to break down those, what really feels like 50 steps. Cause it's like, I'm not going to lie and say it's a 1, 2, 3. But if you know all the pieces of the puzzle, cause it's the government and it's a process, like you can know that that's what the process is. And what I love as we wrap up is that my kids and your kids have similar conversations. And I think you're right about, because they've been touched by foster care, whether going through it themselves or seeing a sibling do it. My children, who both were adopted through foster care, have both told me, Mom, I'm certainly going to do this when I get older. Like, I want to make sure my spouse agrees, but because they've seen it and they know that they're aware of it, right? That it's an option. It is on their mind. So I love that your kids are also having those conversations with you.
Yeah, right. It's not a foreign concept to them, or it's not something that seems so distant or different. And I think that that's all it takes, is making it a familiar concept and a familiar option, which I think is great. Your book, I'm gonna have to recommend it to everyone now that asks me how to get started.
This breaks it down. Yeah. Well, because it took my husband and me, it took us 5 years to figure out the how, because the internet was in a different stage. There just wasn't the same resources.
Yeah.
And then someone over the summer, one of my son's friends, the mom said, are you going to do it as an audiobook? And I was like, I could figure that out. So I call up a friend's dad who's an audio engineer, and it's the pandemic. And he's like, I'm kind of slow. Do you want to come? And it's amazing, Pam. So instead of it being a 5-year process to figure out the steps, or coming to my home for 2 hours and going through them, it's a 90-minute audiobook. So it's like everything's right in front of you, broken down. And it's such a gift to be able, just like you are, like telling other people how to do this, because it's that awareness that can mobilize and help other kiddos. So Pam, this has been, to me, such a treat. And I know to many others, they've loved getting to hear your story, and for many, being able to peel back more under the story. And so I just really appreciate you taking time. I know you've got a lot of family to love and care for, and I appreciate you caring for kids that you may never meet, that you're helping. So thank you for speaking for waiting children.
Oh, thank you so much for this forum and just the opportunity to share and for your work of continuing to share. I think as many of us that get the message out there, and the more the better, right? We can help those kiddos who are in need of homes.
As a listener of the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast, you are helping raise awareness about foster care adoption and the 120,000 children who are waiting for a forever family. You can also help raise awareness by leaving a review, subscribing, sharing, talking about, and liking this podcast. If you'd like more information on adopting a child or sibling set through the foster care system, visit my website, ForgottenAdoptionOption.com. There you will find out how to get started, and you can even order a copy of my book, The Forgotten Adoption Option, which will guide you through the entire process, and it is available in paperback, audio, and ebook. I welcome you to reach out with questions, comments, and your own story. I would love to hear if you're signing up for training or where you are in the adoption process. You can connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Just search for Marcy Bursack. Thank you for tuning in, caring, and sharing, because every child deserves a family.